A hostel is a type of inexpensive temporary accommodation where visitors share a dormitory with several beds, and frequently the beds are in the type of bunk beds, and the accommodations are designed to accommodate as many individuals as feasible. In order to produce a less expensive instead of lodging in hotels and Airbnbs, these both single and mixed gender rooms are possible. They may be shared or private. Restrooms hostels are a popular choice for single people. Tourists that do not want to spend a large sums of money for people or a hotel who genuinely simply intend to use the space to go to bed and not spend much time with the three tales you will soon hear were told by lone travelers who remained in dorms and had less than ideal encounters with the individuals they were occupying the same rooms as narrative one I spoke with this French person for a while. Girl I met through a dating app following my breakup. After some time of texting, we began chatting and chatting on the phone. Nearly each evening we had a great connection. Then she came from a rigid household in which she continued to reside thus. When the notion of my going to see her appeared, she made it plain that she wouldn't be able to accommodate me, and when I inquired about she would like to stay in the same hotel room. Not the first couple, she said. Evenings following our meeting, solely because of her parents, would become quite upset. So since at the age of 23, my finances weren't packed, so I reserved a hostel stay instead of Paris. Far from her, I downloaded a few films to view on the 7-hour journey because I've already knew that I would never be able to sleep. Can on aircraft, and I tried and I was right. Slumbering but never ever approached thus after landing, I took an Uber. I had zero energy when I got to the hostel. Sleep duration throughout the previous 24 hours, I was worn out. The 6-hour time difference causes it to additionally, it was around 3 in the morning, so I could just go crash at least in the hostel bed, and I wouldn't be exhausted the next day. I reached the hostel, which to be honest, wasn't the most pleasant spot ever. Tiny, the lobby has a distinct smell, and the person at the front desk wasn't so passionate about his work. Yet I had to cut him some since it was 3 a.m. after all. I made my way to the room where I would be staying, and there were 5 of the 6 beds vacant, but one had a man seated on it. Was typing on his laptop, and he glanced up at me and back again. I said hello down at his laptop, but he didn't reply. He appeared to be passionate about what he was doing. I simply lay down in one of the vacant beds, but the room's lighting remained. I asked him if it was acceptable for me to turn out the light, and then gave me a glance. Without saying anything, but with a blank look, anything, I stated it again, expecting he didn't hear me, and he gave me a nod with this strange grin. So I stood up and switched off the room's lights. I instantly passed out as a result of my sleep deprivation, yet I was surprised to wake up after a few hours. The room was still dark, but I wasn't certain what awoke me. I went to my website and had a look. The room was nearly pitch black. I could see that all of the beds were dark, were vacant. Where had the other person gone? Everyone was present earlier. Next to me, there were 2 empty bunk beds, upper and lower, yet I was aware that something had to have awakened me. It was 5 in the morning when I checked my phone. The morning I said, fuck it, because I needed to sleep. Most likely gone, and perhaps a noise coming from outside in the hallway roused me. I reclined onto my side and shut my eyes. The slight sounds of traffic outside were everything. I heard the bed immediately began to tremble, and I heard a little break in the aluminum frame in addition to this strange breathing. I was horrified to see the sound on top of. I noticed a head looking over the edge of me, peering into the bottom from the top bunk. Take a nap with me. I noticed the same eerie grin on his face, and his black medium to longish gravity was causing the hair to droop behind the crown of his head while he dangled inverted. It was a terrible scene where words I truly cannot express. I cried out and collapsed from the bed he sat up as he saw what I was looking at in the upper bunk and kept observing me. What the F are you doing? I yelled as I hurled something in his direction. He began to laugh in a really odd way. Unsettling chuckle. I switched on the light right away and searched through my belongings to confirm while observing him. Nothing was taken. Concurrently, then I heard a phone camera click and observed him while he held his phone up to me. Obviously, after taking an image of me, he continued to grin as he gazed at me. There was a problem with this dude. Wasn't sure whether he had any loose screws. Whether he was doing this with his mind or with malicious purpose. I closed my suitcase and went to the reception area and asked for a different room right away, one of the individual private rooms. After giving an explanation and attempting to obtain a decreased rate, he refused to change. However, he promised to check on the room with I didn't interact with the guests I was only with. Call the police since I was unsure if I'm positive that no laws were broken, yet wrote a hostile review. I enjoyed a good rest of my trip there, enjoying myself with the woman I was seeing. However, each time I went back to the hostel, I was afraid I would see that man. I dislike the way a photo of me appears on that strange person's phone, although I'm not physically inclined. I desire in that case. I did get physically narrative too. I travel alone and have stayed in numerous hostels in order to save cash while simultaneously making new, fascinating individuals. I've spent roughly 20 nights there in all. Hostels during my lifetime, and 90% of the whenever I've had positive encounters. However, that was my first really terrible encounter, was at a location known as Freedom Traveler Hostel. And before I start, I would like to mention that my awful encounter wasn't the total negligence on the part of the hostel, the location of the Freedom Traveler Hostel. It was my first time ever in Rome. When I went to Rome, I was totally unfamiliar with the terrain and mainly used locals and Google Maps. Actually locating the hostel itself proved difficult because there were no signs outside the location. But when I discovered the entrance I used to enter, entered through the large brown doors, and was met by a pleasant woman behind the counter. I had previously reserved a room at one of I was shown the 4-person rooms. The room where I would be staying had 2 single beds and a bunk bed add up to room for 4 persons. To sleep, the room's theme was green, yet it wasn't the largest space. The employee informed me that there weren't many occupants of the hostel. I didn't really have a moment issue with whether it would imply that I would possess greater seclusion in the space. The woman was grinning when she all the time, and I was grateful for her assistance. She demonstrated to me where I could keep my luggage, which was essentially only a few shed in the backyard. I didn't feel confident or impressed by it. I therefore made the decision to leave my bags in the room, particularly because I didn't pack anything that is too precious. I was worn out from a full day of traveling, so after getting dressed, and my bags are stored beneath the bottom bunk. I lay down in bed, prepared to take a brief power nap. Shortly after, there was a knock at the 2 young men entered through the door. I could hear their strong Italian accents. Immediately, they welcomed me and struck up a conversation despite being in the middle of a nap. I'm courteous and gregarious, so I was amiable and spoke with them. We identified ourselves as Marco and the Lucio brothers. Marco must have been 6 to 4 because he was so big. Lucio wasn't a child, but he was probably 5 to 11. Any toothpick, and I could observe the similarity between their faces despite their extreme tanning. They both had fading hairlines despite the fact that I could indicate that they were in their early 20s. They didn't have the most amiable appearance. Guys, although initially they appeared to be all right. Sufficient after being familiar in English with the two brothers, then began conversing. In Italian among themselves, they were unaware that I comprehended. But because I immediately knew for them to be laughing and discussing me at me, I think what I heard Marco say about me is a foolish white lad. I had the opportunity to say something there in Italian, but I preferred to retain pretending that I didn't say the language. Eventually, the two brothers stood up from their mattresses and accompanied Lucio out of the room. As they went, they waved and grinned at me. Discovered they were missing their bags in the space, which prompted me to think their bags were left in the garden area storage shed. I spent some time in the garden area simply to interact with a few of the individuals. I met some pleasant people while I was sitting there, travelers who also stayed there for the weekend, after which I went exploring. The city is traveling towards city center following several hours and 2 food stops. I later went back to the hostel anticipating there are some folks mingling in the lounge, either the backyard or the surroundings, although there was nobody. So I thought I'd just get some ahead of time. In any case, it was 9 p.m. I can't recall when I went to sleep, but I recall waking up. The room's lights remained off. However, I heard voices murmuring. The brothers had returned. I listened to what they had to say without moving. We're still using Italian, we said. One of them said in a whisper that interpreted roughly as just grab it, or will you do it? I was unsure of its meaning, but I had a feeling that they were discussing my bags. I had been anticipating the sound of my moving the luggage before I would let they were aware that I was awake, but I felt a moist, cool towel with a pleasant scent crushed against my face, and I shouted and swatted it away in response. My face, I looked over and saw one of the brothers. I yelled, "What are you?" as you stood over me. Carrying out, I was unable to identify which of the men over me after then. It moved to the lower bed and attempted to control me, but I shouted for assistance and threw him off. He was pulled away from me by my other brother, and the pair of men left the room. I hastily picked up my shoes and bag and proceeded to assist the man at the front desk, who claimed to have seen the two while working. Guys left, but no information was provided. On them remaining there at all, two locals who were chosen at random were attempting to rob hostel guests. They actually attempted to chloroform me. Of course, I left that place after that. They must have increased their security. Now, but it's obvious that while I lived there, anyone might have simply entered. Had I been asleep, I would have been chloroformed and took everything out of my luggage. Following this, I became more cautious. Of the hostels where I reside, Narrative 3, I once traveled alone to Miami Beach for the Art Basel, and simply to go away from the chili, she would be accompanied by my buddy Mia. I would meet up with them with my boyfriend, but I wasn't going to stay with them. Miami's hotels and Airbnbs are not inexpensive, but particularly if you're flying alone. I chose to stay at this hostel named Bikini. Hostel like being right in the middle of Miami Beach, and it was quite full, including that there were some folks in the check-in lobby, felt more youthful, With most people in their 20s, it appears that some folks are there in groups. Like myself, I didn't spend a lot of money alone. Spending a lot of time in the hostel, however, it was intended solely as a place for me to sleep. There were lockers available for you to use. Put your bags in so I could leave. The whole day in tranquility. Not until that first evening did I went back and spoke with a few of the individuals, and I was in a mixed-race dorm room, referring to both men and women, yet I was, in fact, the only woman present. I wasn't really uneasy about that. I wasn't truly present at the more than just the money saved. People encountered roughly 3 of the numerous in reality. Individuals were residing in the room. I woke up the following morning, and my first action was to search for my phone, which I looked everywhere and assumed I had left on the bed, over the bed, and then someone underneath it have to have taken it in the room. I began asking everyone whether anyone I asked the man in bed after I had it to give my number a ring and check whether we heard it ring, but nobody was able to. I began to wonder if perhaps I didn't, after all, return it to the chamber. I used the same man's phone to make a call. Tell my pal Mia that I've lost my phone and to come to the brunch spot with me. We desired to strike. I took one final look around the room, then asked the front desk to confirm and requested that they provide me his phone if someone ought to return my phone. I then went to this location to meet Mia on Collins Avenue to join her for brunch along with her boyfriend. I signed, using Mia's phone when I was there, into iCloud to see if I can locate my iPhone. The latest known site, according to it, was at the hostel 2 hours prior, which provided me with a sense of relief, since I may have left it in the locker, in my luggage, or whatever. Together, we returned to the hostel and searched the entire space, including my bag and the locker. It failed to appear, which made completely nonsensical, however. I wasn't going to let that to spoil my journey. We made our way to the convention center on foot, which was the location of the Art Basel. Hours after departing, we got early dinner or late lunch, and have a few bars later, I eventually looked for my iPhone. Once more on Mia's phone, and this time it said that my phone had migrated. It was essentially directly over us. Mia made jokes about me with her boyfriend. I said that I was certain I didn't have it on me. I don't at all. I searched for anyone who could, despite having my phone. I wouldn't even look for now that I've put my phone in lost mode, knowing it was in someone's possession. Did anyone hear Mia's boyfriend shout out, locate a misplaced phone? But nobody arrived. Moving on. But everyone gazed at us, and there were definitely some folks who left. We made numerous attempts to call my phone, repeatedly, even though no one would answer. Retrieved, I returned to the hostel at that time. Dark outside to change into new clothes on my way back. I was beginning to recognize that my phone might not have been working to be given back to me, but my whole stroll, I felt like this strange-looking dude back was pursuing me. He took each and every I took the same turn. He probably didn't notice that I did. However, I had serious doubts about him. Pursuing me, I returned to the room and went on my laptop before changing to make sure locate my iPhone once more. And now that it was back at the hostel, I was thrilled because I believed that perhaps they were giving it back. However, I looked at the front desk and nothing. I questioned several folks at the hostel. Nobody had it either, or at least they weren't acknowledging it. I then used my laptop to access Instagram and began DMing Mia to inform her about when I'm prepared to go out with them. I changed, after taking a brief shower, into more acceptable clothing for going out when I exited the restroom, and I was startled to find when I returned to the room I assumed that dude was after me. Was seated on his bed in one of the telephone. Two more men were there in a room with us at the time, but I had a frightening thinking, so I quickly DM'd Mia to make a call. My phone at the moment, I heard the sound after she said, "Okay," vibrating phone in a pocket or on a bed. I glanced up at the man who was acting suspiciously, simultaneously glanced back at me as though he was aware, which told me everything. I began shouting, "Give me my phone," saying, "I got you to him." I was assisted by the other two men in the room and ordered the man to take his money out and hand me my phone. After listening, he pulled out a phone. Enough about my phone. I grabbed it out of his grasp and informed the other two men he had been following me throughout the day and was intentionally refusing to give my phone back, which he most likely took place while I was asleep. Stood up and quickly left the building. His backpack never came back. So I created buddies of the two men who assisted me. Mark and Paolo were their names. I invited them to join me for a meeting. Alongside Mia, I am appreciative that they were present because I ponder what might have happened. Not the same if they weren't. Additionally, I advise storing your phone and keep your valuables in a secure location if you never spend any time at a hostel, and generally pay attention to those around you.